With transfer portal season officially open, I think Missouri fans have to be on Sam Horn watch here for the next little bit. And also, speaking of the portal, who is out for Missouri and potentially in? Let's talk about it all right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And I want to start today actually with a topic that I haven't seen many people on the Missouri beat talking about right now, surprisingly. Again, with the transfer portal window officially open, you're seeing lots of news out there. Guys leaving various different schools announcing their intentions to be in the portal. Now, of course, you can announce that you're entering the portal and eventually come back. We've seen this happen. In fact, we saw it on the basketball court this past offseason with Caleb Brown, who we all assumed was probably going to be moving on from Missouri, but ultimately ended up coming back anyway. Now, obviously, all these players have their own individual reasons for exploring the market, leaving, potentially even just exploring and deciding to come back. But I will say Sam Horn's situation in particular, I would say, is pretty unique and definitely not similar to anything else we have at Mizzou at this moment. Because obviously, if you're Sam Horn, you came in as a top 100 type player with all types of big-time programs in the SEC coming after you. He probably wasn't expecting that in 2024. He'd still be sitting here going, man, Brady Cook, absolutely the no-doubt starter coming into next year. And make no mistake, just in case there's any doubt out there, Brady Cook is going to be your starting quarterback in 2024, barring injury. So logically, you would think Horn has sat the past 2 seasons on the bench. His redshirt sophomore season, next season, his 3rd year with the program, looks like he's going to be sitting next year as well. Well, indeed, if you want to make the NFL, one thing we've seen a lot of successful quarterbacks, one thing they almost all have in common at that level is they had a lot of experience in college. So the clock is truly ticking here for Sam Horn. He really does need to get on the field pretty soon if he wants to play in the NFL, I would say, or at the very least, just prove that he's a capable starter at the college level, because obviously he's proven nothing in college so far. But obviously with Horn, unlike most players, he has another option. It's called baseball. And that's a big reason why, if we're to believe all the rumor and innuendo out there, a big reason why Sam Horn came to Missouri in the first place is because Drinkwitz and the program were very willing to let him play baseball in the spring. Now, obviously, last year, Horn showed some flashes as a pitcher and unfortunately left the season pretty early, exited the season early with an elbow injury that ultimately didn't seem to hinder him in football whatsoever. So, again, just a lot of different factors here, because if you know about elbows and the pitching motion versus the football motion, just a lot of different motions there, and really a shoulder injury is much more worrisome in both sports than an elbow injury. But an elbow, obviously more of a factor on the baseball diamond when you're having to put so much stress on that elbow, throwing breaking pitches and all that kind of stuff. But regardless, I just think at this moment, I'm not really sure what Sam Horn is going to do because of baseball. I don't know. Perhaps he's just happy here with the Missouri baseball program as it currently stands. Maybe he's a big Carrick Jackson guy. I'm not really sure where Sam Horn's head is, but if he weren't a baseball player, not only a player, but a guy who's a significant major league prospect potentially, well, if it weren't for that, I would say Sam Horn is as good as gone because he needs to start getting experience at quarterback. But how much does he value the baseball side over the football side? Well, only he can really answer that. We just, as Missouri fans, should definitely have our ears very much, to the ground here and listening for any chatter there whatsoever. Just expect some Sam Horn news to drop at any time or maybe never. Maybe he'll just be here quietly come spring football. Now, if Horn does ultimately put his name in the transfer portal, then I would expect Missouri to maybe look for some depth at the quarterback position. Again, not looking for somebody to start. I think everybody knows that Brady Cook is your obvious starter next season. But without Horn, there really wouldn't be an obvious backup on the roster other than Jake Garcia, who transferred from USC to Miami and now to Missouri. The thing with Garcia is at this point, you might think the same thing. Like, well, maybe he'll look for somewhere to play, and maybe he will. But this time for Garcia, quite obviously, since he was the third string quarterback for Missouri this past fall, the idea of him transferring to another Power 5 program and realistically competing for a starting position doesn't seem entirely realistic at this point. So if Garcia wants to transfer maybe down to the group of 5 level, something like that, maybe that'll work out for him. But my point is here, I think you've got your veteran depth piece in terms of a backup in Garcia already on the roster. So again, if Horn leaves, maybe Missouri looks for a depth piece. If they don't, I don't really see the Tigers touching the quarterback market in the transfer portal this season. But when it comes to other places on the offense, in particular running back, well, we know Cody Schrader and Nathaniel Pete are done. So I would almost say it's almost certain that the Tigers are going to find a running back in the portal. The only other running back that touched the ball this past year that I can recall was Jamal Roberts, and that was an extremely limited amount of action for Roberts this season. So there have been a lot of interesting names that have either entered the portal or are strongly rumored to be entering the portal, including Rocket Sanders from Arkansas. He sat out the game against Missouri this past week, but he's a tremendously talented player and one that Missouri was actually pretty strongly in during his high school recruiting. So I would certainly expect Missouri to reach out to Rocket Sanders. Also, Trevor Etienne, who played for the University of Florida this past season. If you remember, well, he was a real big weapon and a real reason why the Gators were nearly pulled off the upset against the Tigers, quite honestly. Trevor Etienne in the second half was a real problem, not only in the running game, but in the passing game as well. So Etienne's a guy that really just about everybody in the country should be interested in because of his talent. I'm sure he's going to cost a pretty penny in terms of name, image, and likeness. How much Missouri values him remains to be seen. I will say, though, if you're any running back, by the way, Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State, among the leading rushers in the country, has been maybe rumored to enter the portal as well. So, again, if you're Trevor Etienne, if you're Rocket Sanders, if you're Ollie Gordon, if you're any of these guys, the one thing is, hey, if I'm going to go to Missouri to be their starting running back, I'm not going to be splitting carries. If I like being the workhorse, well, I know Eli Drinkwitz is going to give me the ball over and over and over again. He's shown that every season so far as a head coach. I certainly wouldn't expect it to change now. So that is something that if you're a veteran running back there, that would be of interest to me. If I think, hey, I have a clear spot here to the #1 job at Missouri, not only is that a good offense for Missouri next year, presumably once again, but also, hey, you're in the SEC, you're on national TV every week. I mean, a great place to show your talents, obviously. And when it comes to the wide receiver room next season, we know that Luther Burden will be back next year, but obviously Theo Weiss is a question mark. Whether he comes back or not may have an effect on whether a former Tiger and a big-time name, by the way, from Tiger Pass could be part of the transfer portal coming up next season. We'll just have to see moving forward with that young man. I'll reveal his name coming up on the other side of this break. That's what we call a tease here in the business, ladies and gentlemen. But first, I just want to tell you that as the weather gets colder, well, the NFL offers stay hot over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, well, there's no better time to get in on the action. And I'll tell you, I got to be honest, I was surprised tonight's Oregon-Washington Pac-12 championship game, the Ducks favored by 10 points. Man, that seems like a lot, but I got to say, generally these days, when I don't have any real insight and I think that seems like too much, usually go with the too much. Not any real advice there, just an observation. But regardless of which way you're leaning there or on any other game this weekend, go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. It's FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. You know, if Luther Burden were eligible for this upcoming 2024 NFL draft, he'd have to strongly consider it, I would say. Burden would certainly be a first-round pick, I think, if he came out, maybe even top 15, top 10. I'm not really sure off the top of my head, obviously. I'm not an NFL scout, but here's the thing. I've had a few people ask me this question. I think most of you are aware of this, but just so we're all on the same page, Burden is not eligible until 2025, that season's draft. Those are NFL rules, nothing to do with Missouri or the NCAA or anything like that. Now, I suppose Burden could pull a Ja'Marr Chase. Remember when the former LSU wide receiver, current Cincinnati Bengal, during the COVID season decided, nuts to this, and sat out the entire 2020 season, preserved his draft status, obviously ended up being a top 5 pick, a Pro Bowler. Everything's worked out for Ja'Marr Chase, is my point. But the odds of Luther Burden doing that are basically zero, I would say, in a non-COVID type season. So, long story short, Luther Burden will be a Tiger next year. Mookie Cooper will almost certainly be back next year, I think. Marquise Johnson will be back. Again, there could be surprises in the portal here. You never know. You never know. A guy like... We weren't expecting Dominic Lovett to leave necessarily. Maybe people, insiders who were closer to the program, weren't surprised. I think a lot of fans like me and you, it kind of came out of nowhere a little bit. So if that happens, you never know. But also, other guys, Mekhi Miller had his moments without question. Josh Manning, I believe, played enough to burn a red shirt. So I think he's a part of Missouri's future, to be sure. The big name's obviously Theo Wease here, because post-game, he was on Luther Burden's Instagram Live, said, "I'm coming back," and then quickly walked that back a little bit, him and his dad saying, I just got a little caught up in the moment. Quite possible, it sounds like, that Theo Wease will come back. Nothing confirmed whatsoever. So, you know, he's maybe 50-50 at this point. I'd probably lean maybe towards 60-40 that Theo Wease comes back, but that's still a decent chance that he does not. So, that's the only, to me, if Wease comes back, I really doubt Missouri delves deeply into the wide receiver market of the portal. But if he doesn't come back, and if Missouri does decide for whatever reason to get a receiver, well, Jamori Macklin is certainly an interesting name. Now, you may remember him as Jay Macklin. He's been going by Jamori the last couple seasons here at North Texas. He played his true freshman season with the Missouri Tigers, had just one catch for 5 yards in the 2020 campaign. He was a Barry Odom recruit that, of course, Eli Drinkwitz ended up retaining as part of his original class. Now, Macklin was a guy, when he came out of high school, I felt like he would be a little bit more of a possession receiver than his famous cousin Jeremy, of course, but it turns out I was quite wrong. The last couple seasons, Jamori Macklin's been one of the most explosive receivers statistically in all of college football. The previous season, he averaged nearly 24 yards a catch. This past season, averaging about 17.5 yards a catch for 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns. Just some massively big plays for Macklin and North Texas. Obviously, he had a huge breakout season. Obviously, he was explosive in 2022, but in 2023, he became a 1,000-yard receiver and a major part of that Mean Green offense. So could he be an option to come back to Missouri, to come back to tramp around the columns once again where he did in 2020 and his famous cousin did as well? I think it's possible. I'm definitely not going to guarantee it because I just don't know that it's a great fit for him. I think there are probably places like Ole Miss and Arkansas, for instance, who I believe have reached out to Jamori Macklin already. Perhaps those teams have a little bit more of a need at receiver, especially maybe in the slot position where I assume Macklin gets a decent amount of his run. Obviously, that's Luther Burden's spot. So, again, maybe just a better fit for Macklin elsewhere, though if he decides to come to Missouri, I'd obviously welcome him with open arms. He's proven to be a real player at the Division I level. There are some other obvious spots on this team where Missouri is going to be hitting the portal hard, probably harder, again, than wide receiver for sure. Left tackle with Javon Foster leaving, I think, is an obvious one. I think Missouri is probably going to be looking for a tackle. Logan Reichert, who was a true freshman this past season, a big young man, a big-time prospect for Missouri, just maybe a little bit too early. Redshirt freshman, tends to take linemen a little bit longer to develop at this level. So it may just be asking too much to count on him to start next year, for instance. So I think left tackle is an obvious spot of need on the offense. Probably even more spots needed in the portal on defense, actually. I'd say cornerback is obviously a big one with Ennis Rakestraw and Chris Abrams-Drain likely moving on, trying their hand at pro football. So there's been some interesting names floated out there already. Number one, I would say Drayden Norwood on one side, I think, has proven more than capable at the corner spot this season. I'd say he's got his starting spot almost locked down at this point, but you may remember the name Toriano Pride, a kid who's played at Clemson the past couple seasons, a St. Louis area guy that Missouri was recruiting quite heavily during high school. Again, that's why you would probably remember that name if you do follow high school recruiting at all. Well, Pride is a guy that sounds like a very strong consideration already for Missouri. So not a huge shocker there just in terms of fit and a previous relationship. But again, that's somebody to keep your eye on. Also, Kansas State, Will Lee III, a cornerback, a rather tall and lanky cornerback, by the way, at 6'3". He's from Kirkwood, Missouri, like the Macklins, by the way, another Kirkwood product here in Will Lee III. So an interesting name also in the transfer portal. Will Missouri kick the tires there? I'm not entirely certain. But one guy, speaking of Kansas State, I can almost promise you that will not be kicking the tires on is Will Howard, the Kansas State quarterback, entered his name into the transfer portal. And according to On3, they were saying Missouri is a possible destination for him. Yeah, I don't think so, On3. I don't see that whatsoever. He's not looking to be a depth piece at this point. And again, Missouri's not looking to shake up the locker room by bringing up some veteran to compete with Brady Cook at this point. That wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. So he, along with KJ Jefferson, by the way, who has entered into the transfer portal, it just sounds like to me, again, Jefferson could come back. I see him probably going to some Big Five type team and making a difference for them for sure. Could even be somebody in the SEC West, much to the chagrin of Arkansas fans. But Missouri not going to be in the market for either one of those big-name quarterbacks. And you know what? We've talked about who is potentially coming in for Missouri. Let's talk about who is likely leaving as well, guys who have announced their intentions to hit the portal already for the Tigers. Plus, while Missouri is not America's team, damn it, they should be. And I want to tell you why coming up right after these quick messages. Well, so far for the Tigers, again, no Sam Horn announcement one way or the other, so no news is good news on that front or any front as far as guys you're wanting to stick around with Missouri for the future. Some bad news, I thought, probably the biggest bad news, I would say, when Valen Erickson decided to enter the transfer portal. Just a young man who definitely has some talent and ability. You were hoping he would grow into being a really good offensive lineman someday. You could say the same for EJ Doma-Ogar. You know, again, just a big, talented lineman that just could never quite get on the field in his short time here with Missouri. Linebackers, similar thing here with Damian Wilson and Xavier Simmons, a couple guys who were, again, just thought of well coming out of high school, just could never get on the field. Max Wisner, the tight end, Dylan Leibel at quarterback, and maybe the biggest, most notable name of all who has entered the transfer portal is former Boonville product DJ Wesolak, a kid who, well, frankly, had one of the most unusual recruiting stories and timelines I've seen. I'm not the biggest high school recruiting guy in the world, but initially when DJ Wesolak put out 15 to 20 schools, something like that from my memory, hey, here's my final 15 or whatever the heck his graphic was that he put out there. Well, there was a whole bunch of big name schools, including a bunch of big time SEC schools on that list, but Missouri was not among them. And for whatever reason, it just seemed like over time, Wesolak's recruitment had really cooled off to the point where, well, maybe Missouri was his best and last option among Power 5 schools. Perhaps Missouri almost felt a little obligated to take Wesolak. Again, this is total speculation on my part. I wish the young man nothing but the best, obviously. I don't know him or anything, but just, you know, an unusual sort of saga for sure that has now come to close, come to close here. It'll be interesting to see where Wesolak ends up, what type of program, where he lands, because obviously a guy with some real talent, but it just seemed like for whatever reason, his senior season of football, his recruiting just hit a big-time momentum skid. And finally, you may have seen this quote that I'm sure went over very well with our SEC rivals here at Missouri. Eli Drinkwitz said, "We're America's team. We're a team built on underdogs. We're a team built on young men with something to prove." Hey, you damn right we're America's team. We should be at the very least. But no, in all seriousness, folks, that's an irritating moniker, to say the least. If you're an NFL fan like I was growing up, and to this day, of course, when you heard that the Dallas Cowboys were America's team, you're going, wait a second, where does this bit of arrogance come from? Well, let me give you a quick history lesson, actually. The reason that Dallas, well, obviously they irritatingly coined themselves America's team, but there was at least a kernel of truth to that, because the Cowboys, expansion franchise in 1960, and at that point, well, there weren't a lot of teams in the Deep South, in Texas, and in the American West at that point. One of the most interesting parts of the 1960s, in my opinion, is just the incredible growth, of course, that you had in that part of the country that continues to this day. Yes, the proliferation of air conditioning, ladies and gentlemen. It's been quite a thing. For instance, back in 1960, Las Vegas, Nevada had a population of 90,000 people. That's about half of what Columbia, Missouri is today. Whereas today, of course, you've got nearly 3 million people in Las Vegas alone. So my point is, while the Dallas Cowboys got an early start, the Kansas City Chiefs were formerly the Dallas Texans. There was that whole feud, of course, between the Cowboys and the Texans that result in the Chiefs going to Kansas City. But the point is, that few-year head start there that the Cowboys got was enormous in terms of their reach and just establishing a fan base, because teams like the Atlanta Falcons, again in the Deep South, the Miami Dolphins, didn't come around until 1965, 1966. So that meant Dallas had already established itself as, if not America's team, certainly the most popular team in Texas and in the Deep South, to the point where If you were watching NFL football on CBS in 1964 in Atlanta, well, guess what? You got the Cowboys every week. That was just basically it. Again, the Falcons didn't come around for a long time, and even then, there was probably more demand for Dallas for decades there until the Falcons got a bit more of a foothold. And even to this day, there are people in the state of Georgia who are more Dallas Cowboys fans than they are Atlanta Falcons fans because of that. So my point is, obviously, Missouri is never going to establish that type of foothold. There are just simply too many teams out there. But you know what? We should certainly be Missouri's team. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Even if you're a graduate of Missouri State, like my buddy Juan is, well, guess what? Juan likes Missouri and Missouri State. We're not really competitors with Missouri State in football. And I hate to say it, Billikens fans, we're not really competing with SLU in basketball either. That's not an insult to SLU. It's just to say there doesn't need to be a rivalry between those schools. That's all I'm saying. Why the hate? Why can't we just root for SLU and Missouri? Is that a thing we can possibly do? But regardless, if I'm going to make the case for Missouri to be America's team, let's say you're an alien that landed and you're looking for a team to root for in this kooky thing called college football. Well, again, we are underdogs. We really are. But we're underdogs with a real chance in a blue bloods world. So you're not rooting for, no offense to Vanderbilt, but sorry, Vanderbilt, you guys don't have quite the chance that Missouri does to at least compete. Now, again, Missouri is obviously going to be the underdogs for forever, as far as I can tell, in terms of resources, fan bases against Alabama and Georgia and those type of teams. But we're certainly big enough to compete. We've proved it this year, and heck, you do that for long enough, you may even level up at some point. And by the way, number two, could you have a better color scheme than black and gold, especially for your everyday merch? I mean, come on. Who among us who's Missouri fans, you'll just wear that stuff out and about all the time, just pull out a Missouri shirt out of your closet and throw it on. It looks great with about anything. On the other hand, if your color scheme heavily relies on, say, orange, for example, tougher sell. So to me, that's all the reason in the world we have cool color schemes. We're the underdogs in a blue bloods world. So you know what? Damn it, we should be America's team. But at the very least, SLU fans, Missouri State people, embrace it. Embrace the state. Embrace the flagship football program and basketball programs. There's plenty of room on the bandwagon. But you know what? Thanks as always for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. And how about get somebody else on the bandwagon as well? Send them to LockedOnMizzou.com. Get a new true son or daughter aboard the Locked On Mizzou bandwagon. So until next time, I am John Miller, and this has been Locked on Mizzou.